I am Hercule Poirot. Welcome to my new mystery story.
The drawing room of Lady Hesketh Dubois' London townhouse glittered with chandeliers and polite laughter. A reception in honor of her latest charitable enterprise, an institute for displaced European children, was well underway. Aristocrats mingled with titled officers and a scattering of continental guests whose presence hinted at fortunes made or lost in the turmoil of war. Silver trays passed between groups, the clinking of champagne glasses masked the occasional whisper of scandal. Yet not all eyes were on Lady Hesketh Dubois. At the far end of the room, framed by heavy velvet curtains, a tall gilt mirror reflected more than gowns and uniforms. Several guests noticed, though none admitted it at the time, a faint stirring in those curtains. A shadow, half concealed, as though someone lingered behind, listening. The first true disturbance came at precisely 9 o'clock, when the chamber orchestra ceased its lilting waltz to allow for Lady Hesketh Dubois' speech. She rose, regal in pale lavender silk, and raised her glass. The moment held. Then a shriek broke through the harmony of polite society. A maidservant stumbled forward from the antechamber, her hands trembling, her face ashen. "There is she faltered, swallowing the horror. A lady behind the curtain." The guests turned. The great velvet drapes were drawn back with sudden force. Slumped in the shadowed alcove, still as marble, was the figure of a woman none could place. She wore evening attire, though dated in style, and in her gloved hand hung a broken string of pearls, several beads scattered on the parquet floor. Her eyes stared glassily, wide open. Death had found its seat at Lady Hesketh Dubois' gathering. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The orchestra violinist dropped his bow, a champagne glass shattered, and then, in that spreading silence, came the whisper that would cling to the night. She was hiding there, hiding behind the curtain. "Would you like me to continue with The Gathering of Suspects next?" 700, 900 words, where all guests are introduced one by one with their possible motives. The scream dwindled into orders. Lady Hesketh Dubois, pale yet steady, raised her hand. The orchestra fell silent, and Pritchard the butler swung the door shut so no one might drift away. The curtains were drawn wide. The woman behind them, dressed a little behind the mode, pearls broken and strewn, received the bright, indifferent light. A faint scent of violets lingered about her gloves. "We shall keep our heads," Lady Hesketh Dubois said. "Pritchard, telephone the police. Dr. Vale, look, but do not disturb." Dr. Corrin Vale, compact and dark-eyed, knelt with reserve. He did not touch the body. "Recent," he murmured. "No struggle. Cyanosis. Poison would fit." Elsie, the maid who had first cried out, twisted her hands. "I went to pull the drape for your speech, ma'am. I felt a shape and heard the little beads hopping on the floor. I pulled, and she came forward like a doll." "There is no such guest on the list," Miss Lydia Gray whispered to her employer, notebook held like a shield. "Mr. Hart vouched for several, but—" Felix Hart, by the mantel, raised a hand. "I vouched for Madame Lemoine and Captain Pierce. I never saw this lady." Madame Lemoine, composed in widow's black, inclined her head. Captain Roland Pierce watched the room. Sir Alistair March, a barrister, cleared his throat. "Poison, is it? Then a glass, a breath of cool and catastrophe. The police will wish all present detained." "They shall have it," Lady Hesketh Dubois replied. "Until then, nothing is to be moved." They looked for a name. There was no reticule. The gloves were buttoned exactly. On the right index finger, a faint streak of ink told of some recent note. Miss Gray, peering delicately, found a tiny pin beneath the lace inset, a cloakroom ticket stub stamped in purple with palmy, followed by a number. "Palmyra," breathed Felix Hart too quickly. "A club near Piccadilly." "Respectable enough," Sir Alistair allowed. "Good sources, discreet cards, Someone there will know her. Someone here may know her, Captain Pierce said, and his eyes drifted to the pianist, a young man with anxious hair. The boy flushed and stooped to catch a page of score that skated to rest beside a pearl. Miss Grey reclaimed both, setting the bead on a tray as if it might carry contagion. Elsie, pressed for recollection, had little. I was with glasses and plates. I saw Mr. Hart and the captain speaking low near the alcove. Dr. Vale went to the orchestra about the program. Miss Grey fetched a pencil from the telephone table. Felix Hart offered a smile. I will be still as a statue until the constable arrives, if that helps anyone. Motive helps, Sir Alister said. Madame Lemoine turned a water glass without drinking. Her dress was once fine, she said. A woman who keeps what was fine may have debts. Or a wish for discretion, Dr. Vale said. The hall clock chimed the quarter. Clusters formed, those who wished to be useful, those who wished to be seen, and those who wished, suddenly, to be forgotten. Pritchard returned with news that the police were coming and set a silk cord around the alcove. A small peculiarity presented itself. Among the pearls, one bead was chipped to reveal glass beneath nacre. The pianist had found it and held it out, uncertain. Dr. Vale turned it in his palm. An imitation among the genuine, he said. Either a repair or an intended false note. A lady might pawn a pearl and mend the strand with a counterfeit, Sir Alister proposed, or a lady with a purpose might plant a counterfeit for effect. For what effect? Asked Miss Grey. To be noticed, Sir Alister said. Theatre, people hide to hear or to be discovered. The curtain offers both. Lady Hesketh Dubois' gaze returned to the alcove. If she hid, she meant to hear something, or someone meant her to hear. What was being said just before the music stopped? Captain Pierce asked. Felix Hart spread his hands. Compliments. I told Madame Lemoine the Institute was a brave enterprise. She answered that courage is cheaper said than done. I teased the pianist for a stumble. He objected. We reconciled. I did not stumble, the pianist said and colored. Who engaged the orchestra? Dr. Vale asked. I did, Lady Hesketh Dubois replied. Through Mr. Hart. Through a contractor, Felix said. I sponsor music, not tragedies. Miss Grey wrote in her notebook. Palmyra, ticket. Ink on right glove. Glass bead, pianist nerves. Felix quick on club, captain watchful. Madame Lemoine. Debts? She drew small squares beside each entry. Lower the chandeliers a fraction, Lady Hesketh Dubois said. We need not stare. The room softened. Outside a car slowed. Tires whispered at the curb. Between the sound and the bell, the company held a single breath. Those who had secrets felt them grow heavier. The cord about the alcove shone faintly, a boundary in a room that had mislaid its lines. The pearls lay where they had fallen, innocent until someone supplied their meaning. The bell rang, not like rescue, but like the next move in a careful game at the door. The chime of the bell reverberated through the hall, and Pritchard moved with unhurried dignity to the front door. The assembled guests, now a captive audience to unfolding tragedy, seemed to breathe as one when the butler reappeared, ushering in 2 uniformed constables and a man whose immaculate moustache and perfectly brushed coat immediately set him apart from the ordinary machinery of the law. Hercule Poirot, compact yet radiating a curious authority, stepped inside with the assured poise of one who knew he would be obeyed. His eyes, sharp and deliberate, swept the room without haste, missing nothing. Lady Hesketh Dubois rose to greet him, though her poise was not as steady as it had been earlier. Monsieur Poirot, how grateful I am that you could come so swiftly. I sent word at once, as soon as the girl was found. Poirot inclined his head gently, bowing over her hand. You did wisely, madame. Where death intrudes among polite society, one must take care that appearances do not sweep away the truth. And now, may I? His gaze shifted towards the alcove where the body lay cordoned. The constables held the crowd back as Poirot crossed the floor. He paused before the drawn curtains, looking not merely at the lifeless woman, but at the folds of velvet, the scattered pearls, the faint dusting of powder on the parquet where the figure had collapsed. He bent slightly, not touching, but considering with those famous grey cells that seemed to weigh every inconsistency. "Unfamiliar to you all, this lady?" he asked softly, glancing at Lady Hesketh Dubois. "Entirely," she said firmly, though her voice trembled at the edges. "Not a guest of mine." Poirot's mustache twitched. "And yet she is dressed for the evening, with gloves that are fastened so precisely, and pearls that are, but not all of them what they claim to be." He nodded to the chipped bead lying upon a silver tray, and his dark eyes glittered with interest. "It is curious, n'est-ce pas? An interloper who appears like a guest, but is known to none." Dr. Vale stepped forward with a quiet cough. "I believe poison, monsieur. Rapid, silent, no sign of struggle." Poirot gave a small bow. "The learned medical man speaks, and we shall not quarrel with his wisdom. But it is not the how that interests me. It is the why. A woman does not hide behind curtains by chance. She has either been forced there, or she has sought it herself. And which it is, we must discover." The eyes of the gathering fixed upon him, the sense of a theatre audience waiting for the first act to commence. Poirot turned slowly, examining them with a neat sweep of his gaze. "We shall begin, if you please, with the order. Each one present will tell me where they were, and with whom in the moments before this discovery. Not too fast, not too slow, but with precision, for it is in the small detail that the truth hides." Lady Hesketh Dubois gestured helplessly towards her secretary. Lydia Gray, already clutching her notebook, stepped forward. "Monsieur Poirot, I keep records of household affairs. I can assist with times and arrangements." "Bon, mademoiselle," Poirot said with approval. "Then you will sit here and note. Your eyes are quick, I think. We shall begin with you, perhaps, to set the tone." Miss Gray flushed slightly, adjusting her spectacles. "I was beside the telephone table, fetching a pencil at the time. I recalled distinctly because the lead of my own pencil had broken and Lady Hesketh was about to speak." "Très bien. And you, monsieur?" Poirot turned to Felix Hart, lounging against the mantel with forced ease. "I was conversing with Captain Pierce," Hart said smoothly. We had stepped aside near the alcove to avoid interrupting the music. "I saw nothing until the maid shrieked." Captain Pierce, broad-shouldered, gave a brief nod. "That is correct. We spoke of old regimental acquaintances. Then the cry rang out. Nothing more." Poirot's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "It is remarkable, is it not, that two gentlemen conversed so near the alcove, yet neither noticed the presence of a lady behind the curtain? Unless, of course, the conversation was more absorbing than they admit." A faint stir passed through the company. Felix Hart laughed lightly, but it had a brittle sound. We were speaking in low tones. The music covered any faint sound. It was hardly remarkable. "Perhaps," Poirot murmured. "And you, Madame Lemoine?" The widow inclined her head, her veil casting a shadow over dark, thoughtful eyes. "I was at the centre of the room, monsieur, speaking with Sir Alistair. I know nothing until the poor maid pulled the curtain." Sir Alistair March confirmed her words with solemnity, adding, "And I myself remarked upon the likelihood of poison once we saw her face." Poirot looked towards the young pianist, who shifted uneasily on his bench. "And you, mon ami?" I was with the orchestra," he stammered. "I had just finished the waltz and was preparing the next sheet. I did not see her, monsieur." Poirot stepped closer, observing the tremor in the youth's fingers. "And yet it was you who found the false bead. That is observant for one who claims to see nothing." The pianist flushed scarlet. It rolled near my foot. I could not ignore it." Poirot inclined his head gravely. "Indeed. And that you did not ignore it may tell us much." He moved back a pace, drawing the circle of eyes upon him. "So we have, mesdames et messieurs, a curious tableau. A stranger dead in your midst. A ticket stub linking her to the Palmyra Club. Pearls that are both real and false. Gloves with a streak of ink upon the finger, and each of you has a position, yet not one can say they saw her before she was revealed. To me, that is very interesting." A silence fell, heavy and expectant. Poirot's gaze lingered, sharp as a scalpel. "The constables will secure the house. None may leave until we understand who she was and why she came here. But rest assured, it will not remain hidden for long. The truth, like a pearl, will shine when the layers are stripped away." As though in emphasis, the clock struck the half-hour. Poirot adjusted his cuffs, nodded politely to Lady Hesketh Dubois, and then fixed his attention once more upon the alcove. The woman behind the curtain remained mute, but around her the living began to reveal themselves piece by piece, as carefully as pearls sliding from a broken string. Poirot asked that the doors remain closed and the cord untouched, then had the little telephone table drawn nearer the alcove. Pritchard placed it where the lamplight fell across the leather blotter, the bowl for cards, and a stub of soft graphite. Poirot did not touch it once. He looked, breathed, and only then took the pencil by its dull end. "A woman with ink on the right forefinger has used a pen recently," he said. "But here we have graphite, not ink. Perhaps she wrote elsewhere and came to listen. Perhaps she handled a pen that was dry. Let us see what the paper remembers." He slipped a fresh sheet beneath the blotter and shaded lightly. Lines rose, faint at first, then crisp. A set of numbers, a place, a single initial. Lady Hesketh Dubois leaned in. "Palmyra, 9 o'clock. For a name, perhaps. For a direction, perhaps," Poirot murmured. "Mademoiselle Gray, did you write upon this tonight?" "I only fetched a pencil," Miss Gray said. "I took a message this afternoon about the seating, not during the party." "Then these impressions are fresh," Poirot said. "If fresh, they belong to this affair. Note the angle. The hand slants left. The pad was crooked, the writer in haste." Sir Alister looked thoughtful. "A rendezvous, then. 9 o'clock at the Palmyra. Someone initialed L. Or someone hopes we will think so," Poirot said mildly. "The small clues, they are sometimes too eager." He turned to the curtains. Lifting the velvet by its fringe, he examined the brass pole, the rings, the narrow floor. On the oak, caught when the light slid across it, were 2 crescent scuffs as if a heel had pivoted sharply. "Our lady stood here long enough to shift her weight," he said. "She did not tumble into hiding." Dr. Vale spoke with reserve. "If poison, the agent could have been taken minutes earlier. A glass." "For the present, no glasses are removed," Poirot said. "Pritchard, bring the tray from which champagne was last served. And the guest list, if you please." Felix's heart was quick. "I can provide that at once. I handled several acceptances." "Your zeal does you credit," Poirot said, and looked at him a fraction longer than courtesy demanded. "First, a small arrangement. Constable, no private telephone calls, no wandering. Captain Pierce, assist in order, if you will." The guests rearranged themselves under the pressure of necessity. Lady Hesketh Dubois yielded her small morning room for private questioning. Poirot did not begin with interrogation. He began with walking. From alcove to piano, to the sideboard with its cut-glass decanters, to the French windows, latched and heavy with night. "The curtains stirred earlier," he said. "Yet these windows admit no draught. What makes velvet breathe? A body does when it draws the breath of fear, or—" He tapped the hem, a hand that fidgets with the fringe. Madame Lemoine watched him steadily. Some people cannot keep still when they listen. It is human. "It is very human," Poirot agreed. "But when one listens to what one should not hear, the restlessness is sharper." Pritchard returned with the tray. 3 flutes showed faint stains at the rim. 2 bore lipstick, 1 clear. Poirot's gaze passed to a 4th, where a bubble had dried and left a tiny puckered ring. "Who poured this?" "I did, sir," Elsie said at the door. "For her ladyship, for Madame Lemoine, for Mr. Hart, for the captain, and 1 spare because Pritchard told me to keep ahead." "You did not serve our hidden guest?" "No, sir. I never saw her." Poirot nodded. "Yet she dies as if she had sipped. So either she drank before she came, or she took from another's glass, or the kiss of poison came by a different road. The glove, the necklace, the air itself made to carry the thing. We do not decide it now." He asked for the pianist's folio. Between pages of a waltz lay a scrap of newsprint, stiffening a torn corner. Poirot teased it free. The scrap was an advertisement column, nothing unless one looked twice. A penciled cross marked, "Private rooms available, Palmyra. Inquire discreetly." He folded it with the paper shaded from the blotter. Felix Hart exhaled softly. "That proves only that musicians read the entertainments." "That proves," Poirot said, "that our evening has strands. They will twist or separate." He spoke to a constable, who went to telephone the Palmyra Club with instructions to hold cloakroom records for the hour. Then Poirot invited the first of the household to the morning room. He chose not a guest of rank, but Elsie. She perched, twisting her apron. Poirot's voice was very gentle. "Mademoiselle, you are frightened of a mistake. Do not be. Truth lives in small corners. What did you hear when you touched the curtain?" "Only the beads, sir, like rain running on the floor, and a sort of sigh." "A sigh, like someone who had been holding her breath." "Merci," he said, and dismissed her with a kindness that steadied. To Miss Grey he said, "You next." The house seemed to hold its breath. Miss Grey sat where Elsie had sat, her notebook clutched as if it might shield her from what she was about to say. Poirot folded his hands neatly and regarded her with a stillness that compelled honesty. "Mademoiselle," he said gently, "you are the secretary. You observe what others overlook, n'est-ce pas? You write down, you arrange, you correct. Tonight you fetched a pencil, but I think you fetched also more than that." Her cheeks colored faintly. "I did not hide anything, Monsieur Poirot. I heard the maid scream like everyone else. Before that, I was merely preparing notes for her ladyship's speech. There was so much confusion with last-minute additions to the guest list." "Additions?" Poirot raised an eyebrow. "And who insisted on them?" "It was Mr. Hart," she said reluctantly. "He telephoned twice during the day. The last time, just before dinner, he asked if an extra card might be made available for a European acquaintance. He would not give a name, only said it was delicate." The words drew a stir from the drawing-room beyond. Poirot held up his hand and continued in his calm tone. "Did her ladyship know?" "She trusts Mr. Hart in such matters," Miss Grey admitted, "and I had no authority to refuse." Poirot's mustache twitched with satisfaction. "You see, mademoiselle, already your sharp eye is useful. We have a door, perhaps, by which our intruder entered." He rose, offered her a courteous nod, and allowed her to return. Next, he summoned Felix Hart. The financier strolled in with a composure that was perhaps a shade too deliberate. Poirot gestured to the chair. "Monsieur, you will forgive me. Your name is linked to both the guest and the club. This is, how do they say in England, an awkward coincidence." Hart lit a cigarette before replying. "Coincidence or not, Poirot, I did indeed arrange for someone to attend. She was a foreign lady, distressed, in need of introductions. I met her only twice at the Palmyra. I thought Lady Hesketh might extend her patronage. That is all." "And yet you did not bring her forward to your hostess, but allowed her to conceal herself behind curtains." Poirot's voice was soft, but his eyes were relentless. Hart exhaled a long plume of smoke. "I never saw her once she arrived. If she wished to listen in secret, it was her own choice. I cannot be blamed if she feared embarrassment. Perhaps," Poirot said, but when one fears embarrassment, one does not usually bring imitation pearls to a noble house. Tell me, monsieur, what did she seek from you? Hart hesitated, flicked ash into the tray. Money. She spoke of investments gone wrong on the continent. I promised nothing. She may have hoped to encounter me tonight, but she never said so. Poirot let the silence draw itself taut. Then, very gently, and did she use your name when she sought admittance? She did not need to. I instructed the doorman to admit her. Voilà, Poirot murmured. So the key was in your hand. When Hart left, the atmosphere in the outer room grew tense. Murmurs swelled, hushed only when Captain Pierce was called. The officer's bearing was brisk, yet his glance towards Hart betrayed unease. I have nothing to hide, monsieur, he began. I met her also, at the Palmyra. A woman in distress, yes. But Hart was the one who entertained her stories. I offered her no encouragement. Poirot tilted his head. And yet you spoke with Hart near the alcove when the discovery was made. We were discussing regimental business, Pierce said firmly. Nothing to do with her. Perhaps, Poirot allowed. But you do not deny that you knew her face. Pierce paused. I recognized her, yes. She called herself Madame Corvier. Beyond that, I know little. This name dropped into the still air, rippled like a stone cast into water. Poirot marked each face in the room as the sound of it passed. Madame Lemoine's gloved fingers tightened. Sir Alister's gaze flickered downwards. Miss Grey's pencil halted in mid-line. Poirot allowed the silence to linger, then dismissed the captain. At last, Madame Lemoine entered. She moved with the quiet dignity of one accustomed to scrutiny. Poirot bowed deeply. Madame, you conceal grief under black. Yet when the captain spoke, I saw you tremble. Why? Her eyes flashed. I trembled because the name is not unfamiliar. Corvier was whispered in Paris before the war. A woman who trafficked in secrets, who played at confidant and extortion both. If this is she, then her death is not surprising. Not surprising, perhaps, Poirot said, but particular. To die in London, behind a curtain, in a house of charity, it is a stage too carefully chosen. Madame Lemoine inclined her head. That is for you to decide, monsieur. When she had gone, Poirot remained seated for a long moment. He laid the scrap from the pianist's folio beside the shaded impressions from the blotter, studying them together. Both spoke of the Palmyra. Both pointed to meetings arranged in secret. Both suggested a network hidden beneath society's veneer. He rose, smoothing his cuffs, and addressed the gathering once more. Mesdames et messieurs, the lady is no anonymous intruder. She had a name, at least one, and perhaps more. She moved among you by invitation, and she died among you by design. What she carried, pearls both true and false, words half written, an appointment half kept, these things will lead us where we must go. Already I see the threads beginning to knot, but before the knot is tied, it may strangle yet another. A hush fell, heavy with the implication. The constables shifted uneasily, and the maid whimpered. Poirot's eyes gleamed beneath his arched brows. Yes, he said softly. Another move is coming, and we must be very quick to see it before it falls. The silence that followed Poirot's words was not a silence of calm, but one of strain, as though every person in the drawing-room was listening to their own heartbeat. The mention of another move coming, the hint that the night's horror might not be finished, hung over the guests like a gathering storm. Poirot, aware of their tension, moved with his customary precision back towards the alcove, his hands clasped neatly behind his back. He paused, eyes narrowing at the fallen pearls once more, then bent just enough to observe the scattering from a new angle. You see, he murmured, more to himself than to the company, they do not fall evenly. There is a line, a trail, as though the necklace broke not at the moment of death, but some seconds earlier. She moved to this place, already holding the broken strand. His finger traced the invisible path along the parquet. And why? To conceal herself, to keep a meeting, or perhaps to overhear words meant to damn her. Dr. Vale spoke softly, his voice respectful now that Poirot had seized the scene. She may have been faltering, poisoned, and sought support against the curtain. Poirot inclined his head slightly. It is possible, but it does not explain the pearls. They scatter when the clasp breaks, not before. And yet she carried them, broken, as if to show them to someone. At that moment a constable entered from the vestibule, cap in hand, his face taut with the seriousness of his errand. "Message from the Palmyra Club, sir. The cloakroom girl confirms a ticket stub of that number was given to a lady earlier this evening. She described her as foreign, mid-30s, dark hair, wearing that very gown. Arrived alone. No departure noted." Poirot accepted this with a nod. "So she came from Palmyra to here, by arrangement, that we knew. But she left no cloak, no wrap." Curious indeed. Lady Hesketh Dubois' composure wavered at last. "Monsieur Poirot, if this woman trafficked in secrets, and if she had some hold over one of my guests, then my house has been made the stage of something vile. I beg you to untangle it swiftly." "Courage, madame," Poirot said with a slight bow. "Already we advance." His eyes darted to Madame Lemoine. "You, madame, spoke of whispers in Paris. You may be of more help than you imagine. Tell me, was this Madame Corvier feared or merely disliked?" The widow's lips tightened. Feared. She had letters, documents, fragments of scandal. She knew when to ask for silence and when to demand a price. Some paid, some fled. That she should appear here tonight, it chills me. Poirot tapped his fingertips together. It chills, but it enlightens. For if she dealt in blackmail, then her presence here was no accident. Someone among us expected her, perhaps dreaded her. His gaze turned slowly to Felix Hart, who had returned to lean once more by the mantel, and then to Captain Pierce, whose jaw had grown taut as iron. Neither man spoke, but the air between them seemed to thrum. Poirot broke it gently. "Let us imagine, then. She comes with her pearls broken, perhaps as a symbol, perhaps as accident. She waits behind the curtain to overhear or to confront. But she is silenced, swiftly, cruelly, without struggle. Poison is neat, is it not? It allows the criminal to stand near, to speak pleasantly, while death coils unseen." The pianist, forgotten until now, gave a sudden nervous laugh that drew every eye. He stammered, I only mean it is dreadful to think one might drink and never know. That could happen to any of us." "Indeed," Poirot said, and though his tone was mild, his glance was sharp. "It could happen to any, but it did not happen to you. It happened to her behind the curtain. The detail interests me. Why there, and not before? A murderer who strikes does not choose a hidden alcove unless it serves the play." Sir Alistair March, his voice low and careful, interjected. "Then the curtain is part of the staging. She may have been directed there by the one who wished her silence." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah, you see it too, monsieur. The setting, the moment, even the discovery, these things can be arranged, just as a barrister arranges the words in court." Another constable entered, carrying a small object wrapped in cloth. "Found this in the corridor near the service stairs, sir. A glass vial, stoppered, with a trace of liquid inside." He unwrapped it, and all leaned closer. Poirot examined without touching. Not clumsy, this criminal. To leave such a trace is almost too careless, unless perhaps it was meant to be found. The theatre continues. He motioned the vial away to be sealed, then said in a voice that cut across the room, "Mes amis, I must warn you. The person who orchestrates such a drama will not stop at one act. There is more to come. Until we unmask them, none of you is safe from the next curtain that falls." The words cast a shudder through the company. Lady Hesketh pressed a handkerchief to her lips. Madame Lemoine's veil trembled faintly. Hart's cigarette quivered between his fingers, though he tried to hide it. Poirot, perfectly composed, turned back toward the alcove and adjusted the line of the velvet drapes, setting them neatly as though order itself were the first step towards truth. "Yes," he said softly, almost to himself. "Another move indeed. And this time we shall be ready when it comes." The clock struck the hour. The sound rang through the house, measured and inescapable, and with it every heart present seemed to tighten, waiting for the next inevitable revelation. The chiming of the clock had scarcely faded when the inevitable ripple came. A sharp cry rang out from the morning room, where Miss Grey had withdrawn to collect her notes. Guests leapt to their feet. Poirot moved more swiftly than any had thought possible. Within moments he stood at the door, raising a hand to hold back the surge of anxious onlookers. "Stay where you are, if you please. Too many feet spoil the pattern." He entered alone, followed only by one constable. Miss Grey was seated at the writing desk, her face white as linen, her hand trembling over the pages. The lamp beside her flickered. Beside her lay a sealed envelope, not there earlier, addressed in a neat foreign script to L.G. She looked up as Poirot approached. "It was here when I returned," she whispered. "I swear, monsieur, it was not before." Poirot bent over the envelope without touching it. The seal was ordinary wax, pressed with no signet but with the simple impression of a button. He gestured for the constable to stand ready, then drew on gloves and lifted the missive delicately. "It is always so," he said quietly, "when one waits for the next move. It arrives." He opened it with care. Inside lay a single sheet, folded once. Written in the same foreign hand was a warning: "Speak, and you follow me." Beneath it, a smear of violet powder had left a faint trace, as though brushed deliberately across the page. Poirot studied it, his moustache bristling. "Threats, delivered under our noses. Very daring." Miss Grey clutched her notebook. "It is for me. Why me? I know nothing but what I have written." Poirot regarded her thoughtfully. "Perhaps that is why, mademoiselle. You write, you keep record. The truth slips into your lines whether you intend or no. Someone fears your notes." He took the book gently, skimmed its tidy entries, then returned it. "Continue, but with great caution." They returned to the drawing-room, Poirot holding the letter aloft. The company murmured as the constable announced what had been found. Poirot silenced them with a glance. "This is the second act. The first was murder. The second is menace. The hand that wrote this may yet write again." Sir Alister leaned forward, frowning. "But how, Poirot? The room is guarded, the doors secure. No one left us." "Exactly, monsieur," Poirot replied. "Therefore the letter was planted before, and revealed only now. It was waiting for the moment of discovery, like the lady behind the curtain. Timing is the weapon here." Captain Pierce muttered something under his breath, too low for most to catch, but Poirot's ears were sharp. "You disagree, mon capitaine?" Pierce stiffened. "Only that it smacks of theatrics. Real crime is not so neatly staged." Poirot's eyes glinted. "Ah, but the clever criminal knows that you will say so. They rely on your disbelief." At that instant, Elsie the maid, lingering by the sideboard, gasped. "Sir, look!" She pointed to the silver tray still holding the champagne flutes. One, the glass that had earlier borne no lipstick, now showed a faint ring at its rim, as if it had been touched by powdered lips. Poirot hurried over, inspecting with fastidious care. The same violet smear marked the edge. He lifted the glass delicately. So the hand moves again. A mark appears where none was. What does it tell us? That someone wishes us to think the poison came this way, but such clues, arriving late, are like actors who miss their cue. They betray themselves. Madame Lemoine's voice, low but firm, broke the hush. "This is too contrived. Whoever does this mocks us, mocks you, monsieur. Poirot bowed slightly. Mockery, madame, is also a weapon. It breeds haste, and in haste lies error. We shall not be hurried. He requested that each guest remain seated while the constables checked every pocket, every handbag, every folded program. The search yielded nothing incriminating save for a small scrap of blotting paper in Felix Hart's inner coat pocket, stained faintly with the same violet powder. He shrugged when it was held aloft. From a letter earlier in the day. Surely that proves nothing. Poirot's gaze rested on him, unblinking. Perhaps it proves nothing, or perhaps it proves you are too quick to dismiss. We shall see. The guests were restless now, nerves fraying under the strain. Lady Hesketh Dubois pressed Poirot for reassurance. Surely you will resolve this soon. My house cannot bear such shadows. Poirot's voice was gentle but inexorable. Madame, patience. The play has more scenes yet, but I promise you, before the curtain falls for the last time tonight, the guilty hand will be revealed. He placed the threatening letter and the marked glass together on a side table, isolated like exhibits in a courtroom. Then, with deliberate calm, he returned to his chair at the center of the room, surveying each face in turn. You see, mes amis, he said softly, the murderer grows impatient. They plant, they threaten, they distract, but in their haste they begin to show themselves. I watch the little things, the powder, the timing, the tremor of a hand. Soon it will be enough. The air was thick, expectant, fearful. No one dared speak, and then the lamps flickered, once, twice, as though the very house drew a breath. Somewhere upstairs a door slammed, sudden and violent. Poirot rose instantly. Voilà, he murmured. The third act announces itself. The slam from above froze the room into silence, as though every guest had turned into a figure on a stage, waiting for direction. Poirot held up one hand, commanding calm without a word, then gestured to the constables. Two men moved quickly to the staircase, their boots thudding against the polished wood. The others remained tense in their seats, eyes following the movement as though escape might suddenly be denied them. Poirot himself walked slowly toward the foot of the stairs, his head inclined, listening. A muffled scuffle sounded above, shoes sliding, a brief curse. Then the constables returned, half dragging the young pianist between them. His face was flushed, his hair in wild disarray, and in his fist he clutched a folded sheaf of music. He twisted, protesting in a cracked voice. I was only looking for quiet, monsieur. I swear it. The noise, the whispers, I could not bear it. Poirot's gaze was steady. But you did not seek quiet before. Why now, when the house is guarded? And what treasure did you think to find upstairs? The boy's eyes darted, panic flaring. Nothing, I swear, only my nerves. I thought to find water. Poirot extended a hand. Reluctantly, the constable prized the music from the youth's grip. Poirot unfolded it, page after page of Chopin and Strauss, until a loose sheet slid out and fluttered to the floor. He stooped, retrieved it, and held it up. It was not music at all, but a letter, torn at the edge, its ink faded but legible. The handwriting matched the warning note discovered moments earlier. A gasp rippled through the company. Poirot raised his brows slightly, as though the matter amused rather than surprised him. So, our phantom correspondent keeps their papers close. Tell me, mon jeune ami, how did this come into your possession? The pianist shook his head violently. I do not know. It was among my folios. I did not place it there. Someone must have slipped it when I wasn't looking. Perhaps, Poirot said softly, and perhaps not. But why then flee upstairs? I heard a sound, the boy stammered. A door closing. I thought, perhaps the killer still moved about. I panicked, that is all. The constables held him fast, but Poirot motioned them to release their grip. No, let him sit. Panic is not guilt, though the guilty may pretend panic. We shall see. He laid the new letter beside the first. Both bore the same slanting hand, both the faint violet trace, the fragments aligned, the torn edges fitting like puzzle pieces. Together they formed a larger warning, more chilling now that the word stood whole. Speak of Palmyra, and you follow me to silence. Poirot tapped the letters gently. Voila. At last, the mask begins to slip. Palmyra, always Palmyra. Our victim came from there, our messages threaten it, our guests link to it. There lies the root. Sir Alister leaned forward, troubled. Then we must assume blackmail, documents or secrets tied to that club. Whoever feared exposure struck first. Poirot gave a small, approving nod. It is likely. But one must be precise. Blackmail alone does not explain pearls, nor ink upon the glove, nor the staging behind the curtain. It is not enough to say why she was killed. One must say how the killer wished it to appear. At that moment, another constable hurried in, breathless, bearing a small lacquered box. Found in the cloakroom, sir, wedged behind a row of umbrellas. Labelled with the same number as the ticket stub. Poirot accepted it, examined the clasp, and opened it with care. Inside were folded slips of paper, each covered in a scrawled hand. Names, dates, sums of money, brief allusions to scandals, small but poisonous fragments that could ruin reputations if placed in the right ear. A collective intake of breath swept the room as he read aloud a few entries. H. Gambling debt, settled in part. P. Indiscretion at Boulogne. L. Letter withheld. The initials were sparse, but suggestive enough to set nerves jangling. Felix Hart's face hardened, Captain Pierce looked suddenly pale, and Madame Lemoine lowered her gaze. Poirot closed the box with a snap. Behold, the tools of Madame Corvier. Each slip a dagger, small but fatal. With such weapons she held sway, and tonight she sought perhaps to deliver or to demand. Instead, she died. Lady Hesketh Dubois' voice trembled. But this implicates us all. Those initials, anyone may be touched. Poirot inclined his head gravely. That is why she was feared. Yet among you sits the one who feared her most, who struck to silence her and then sought to misdirect us with powder and pearls. It is not yet revealed, but it comes. Already the clues point their fingers. The pianist, still trembling, whispered, "Then one of us, someone here, killed her." Poirot's eyes swept the circle, resting briefly on each face, lingering just long enough to let the weight of suspicion settle. Mais oui, mon ami. The circle is closed. The murderer is among us, and before this night ends, I will speak the name. But first, we must watch, for when fear tightens, the guilty hand cannot help but betray itself. The lamps steadied once more, the storm outside pressed against the windows, and the company sat frozen in anticipation. Poirot, perfectly composed, returned to his chair and folded his arms, content to let silence grow heavy, knowing the strain would force the truth closer with every passing moment. The hush that followed was not passive, but taut, each guest caught between dread and anticipation as though the very air might betray them. Poirot remained seated, eyes half-lidded, yet his attention never wavered. He let the silence do his work, for silence compels thought, and thought stirs guilt. At last, Sir Alister broke, his barrister's voice sharp with tension. "If you truly believe the killer sits among us, Poirot, then do not torment us with hints. Name them and be done." Poirot's mustache lifted faintly, the ghost of a smile. "Patience, monsieur. To accuse too soon is to err. The truth, she must be revealed step by step, else we risk mistaking shadow for substance." He rose, pacing slowly towards the side table where the lacquered box and letters lay. He lifted the box once more, opened it, and drew out one slip of paper, holding it delicately between thumb and forefinger. "Observe. This one. H. Investment collapsed, owed to a widow. Who among us is H? All eyes turned inevitably to Felix Hart. He gave a short laugh, though his knuckles whitened on the arm of his chair. So I am to be condemned by a single letter? Half the country has an H in their name. Poirot inclined his head. Just so, monsieur. A single letter proves nothing. But when we add to it your invitation to the victim, your presence near the alcove, and the violet-stained blotter in your pocket, the pattern begins to form. Hart stood abruptly, his voice tight. I had business with the woman, yes. She pressed me for funds I did not owe, waved scraps of gossip like weapons. I told her I would not be blackmailed. If that is guilt in your eyes, then accuse me outright. Before Poirot could reply, Madame Lemoine's voice cut through, low and resonant. He is not the only one, monsieur. Read another slip. Poirot did so. P. Indiscretion at Boulogne. Witness concealed. And here we have Captain Pierce. The officer flushed, his jaw clenched. A trivial matter, years past. She sought to twist it into scandal. I denied her and told her never to approach me again. But I did not kill her. Two men with motives, Poirot said softly. Yet motives alone are not enough. We must examine the method. He moved to the tray of glasses again. Poison, neat and quick. The glass marked with violet powder. Found after the fact. Too neat, too late. A plant designed to mislead. He turned, eyes narrowing on the company. But who here is accustomed to arranging appearances, to constructing illusions that deceive the eye? The pianist startled, stammering, Not I, monsieur. Music is no illusion. It is art. Art is illusion, mon jeune ami, Poirot corrected gently. And yet I do not think the young musician plotted so carefully. No, the hand is older, more practiced, a hand that knows how to draft a case, how to present only the facts that suit, how to cloak truth beneath argument. He let the weight of his words fall upon Sir Alistair. The barrister straightened, his expression controlled. You dare suggest... Ridiculous. I had no reason. Ah, but you did, Poirot said quietly. This slip, L letter withheld. Who is L? Lemoine, Grey, yes, but also March, for the L may be the initial of what the lady herself chose. She used shorthand, not precision, and who better to profit from withheld letters than a barrister who knows their value in court? A flicker passed across Sir Alistair's face before he regained composure. Conjecture, nothing more. Poirot spread his hands. Perhaps. But we are not finished. Recall mes amis, the pearls. Scattered in a line, carried broken into the alcove. Why? Because our victim wished to present them, perhaps to accuse someone of substitution. Among her slips was mention of a debt to a widow. Madame Lemoine, your pearls, they are genuine. She lifted her chin proudly. They are. The necklace she carried was not mine. Just so, Poirot murmured. But she intended to claim it was. To show she possessed proof of some deception, that threat alone could ruin. The strain deepened, eyes darted from one face to another. Poirot allowed it to build, then continued with measured calm. And then the threatening letters, planted before, revealed in stages, timed for maximum fear. That is the mark of cunning, of strategy, of one who thinks like a dramatist. It is no simple panic of murder, but a campaign to confuse. He stopped before the fire, turning slowly to face them all. Do you see, mes amis? The killer is not merely a person with a motive. It is the one who understands theatre, who chooses curtain, pearls, letters, threats, all as parts of a performance. Murder here is not crime alone. It is spectacle. The guests shifted uneasily, each remembering their own words, their own movements, suddenly suspecting themselves as actors in a play they had not chosen. Poirot lifted a hand, silencing whispers before they began. We are close, very close. The truth peeks through the curtain as surely as our poor lady once did. And when the final piece falls into place, the guilty one will find the stage is theirs alone. The fire hissed softly, the rain lashed at the windows, and in that charged stillness, Poirot resumed his seat, hands folded, patient as ever. He knew the next move would not come from him, but from the one who could no longer bear the weight of silence. The storm outside lashed harder, each gust rattling the windows as though urging the house itself to confess. Within, the silence was brittle. The guests sat rigid, their eyes darting between Poirot and the lacquered box on the table. Poirot leaned forward slightly, fingertips pressed together, his voice low yet carrying to every corner. "We are nearing the truth, mes amis. The play is almost over, but before the curtain falls, the guilty one will surely betray themselves." He let the words linger, then rose and began to walk slowly about the room, pausing beside each guest. When he stopped at Felix Hart, the financier's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. When Poirot moved to Captain Pierce, the officer shifted uncomfortably, his fists clenched on his knees. Sir Alister March sat erect, outwardly composed, though a bead of perspiration gleamed at his temple. Madame Lemoine's veiled face revealed little, though her gloved hands twisted restlessly in her lap. Lydia Gray clutched her notebook with both hands, as if afraid to release it. Poirot stopped finally beside the pianist, who stared at the carpet, his face pale. "And you, mon jeune ami," Poirot said softly, "you tremble still. Is it guilt or fear?" The boy's voice cracked. "Fear, monsieur. I have never been near such horrors. I thought music was my refuge, yet tonight it betrays me." Poirot regarded him a moment longer, then turned away. "Perhaps it is not music that betrays you, but something else." He returned to the side table, lifted one of the slips from the box, and held it aloft. "Observe this. Gray. Keeps record. Knows too much." You see, even our diligent secretary was not beyond the reach of Madame Courvier's hand. She made notes of all, and in those notes was power. That is why the threatening letter was addressed to her. But if the blackmailer herself feared exposure, why would she threaten? No, the letters came not from her, but from the one who silenced her, seeking to extend her shadow and mislead us. Miss Gray gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "You mean the murderer forged them?" "Precisely," Poirot said. "The handwriting, the violet powder, the timed appearance, it was all theatre. And who among us commands theatre best? Not the nervous musician whose panic betrays him. Not the soldier whose methods are blunt. Not the financier who calculates but does not craft illusions. No, it is the barrister, Sir Alister March, who lives by presentation, by carefully arranging words and facts until the jury sees only what he wishes." A collective stir swept through the company. Sir Alister rose to his feet, colour draining from his face. "This is monstrous. You accuse me because I know how to argue, because I can marshal facts. That is not proof." Poirot's eyes glittered. "Not proof alone, monsieur, but the details condemn you. You stood with Madame Lemoine when the maid discovered the body, yet you were closest to the sideboard earlier, where the glasses were placed. You spoke first of poison, before the doctor even examined. You claimed it was too neat, too silent, as though you already knew the method. And above all," Poirot produced a small folded scrap from his pocket. "This torn fragment, found beneath the writing desk in the morning room, bears your handwriting. It matches the forged notes exactly. The barrister who drafts contracts, who scribbles in chambers, cannot disguise his own flourish, however he tries." Sir Alister swayed slightly, then straightened, his voice hoarse but defiant. "Even if true, what motive would I have?" Poirot's moustache twitched with satisfaction. The slip marked L, letter withheld. Madame Courvier held a letter that could ruin you, perhaps reveal dealings unfit for a man of the bar. You feared exposure, disgrace, the end of your career. You met her here tonight, allowed her admittance through Hart's arrangement, intending perhaps to reason, perhaps to pay. But when she pressed you, when she showed the broken pearls as proof of her hold, you panicked. You used the poison you carried. Quick, discreet, and you staged her discovery behind the curtain, the perfect courtroom tableau, and when suspicion grew, you extended her reach with forged threats, hoping to scatter our attention. A stunned silence followed. Sir Alister's eyes darted wildly, seeking an ally, but none met his gaze. Hart's lips curled in contempt. Pierce looked grim. Madame Lemoine merely shook her head. Poirot stepped closer, his voice now gentle. "Confess, monsieur. The play is over. The curtain falls." For a long moment, Sir Alister said nothing. Then he laughed, a hollow, broken sound. Yes, she would have ruined me. Years of work, reputation, honor, all gone with a single letter. She gave me no choice. His voice hardened. She dealt in poison long before I touched her glass. The constables moved swiftly, placing firm hands on his shoulders. Lady Hesketh Dubois closed her eyes, whispering a prayer. Miss Grey, shaken, clutched her notebook to her chest. The pianist buried his face in his hands. Poirot bowed slightly to the company. "Justice is served, mes amis. The guilty are unmasked, the innocent relieved. Yet remember, murder is never neat theater. Behind the staging lies fear, desperation, folly. That is what we have seen tonight." He adjusted his cuffs, his composure unshaken, and gave a final nod to Lady Hesketh Dubois. "Order is restored, madame, and so, with your permission, Hercule Poirot shall take his leave." The storm outside eased at last, the rain subsiding into a steady patter, as though even the heavens were satisfied that the curtain had fallen, and the truth, relentless as always, had taken its bow. The guests lingered in uneasy clusters as Sir Alister was led away, his once commanding figure diminished by the weight of disgrace. Lady Hesketh Dubois stood near the hearth, her lavender gown now seeming a shade too fragile for the night's ordeal. She clasped Poirot's hand with quiet gratitude. "Monsieur, you have restored my house from scandal. I cannot thank you enough." Poirot inclined his head modestly. "It is not thanks that one seeks, madame, but order. Where there is disorder, confusion, fear, misdirection, there lies the work of Hercule Poirot. Tonight we have restored harmony, though at a cost." The lacquered box still rested on the side table. Poirot lifted it once more, then shut the clasp firmly. "These little slips of paper, they are dangerous weapons. They wound not the body, but the reputation, the honor. That for some is worse than death. Madame Corvier wielded them recklessly, and in the end she fell victim to her own stage." Felix Hart exhaled, his tone rueful. So it was March all along. He seemed the very pillar of propriety. "Just so," Poirot said softly. "The pillars, they cast the longest shadows. He feared exposure, and in that fear he revealed himself. Remember, mes amis, it is not the great passions alone that lead to crime, but the small vanity, the dread of humiliation, they drive men to desperate acts." Captain Pierce, arms folded, muttered, "And we were all suspects, each of us tainted by her slips. I suppose we must live with the stain." Poirot's eyes twinkled faintly. "Non, mon capitaine. You must live with the knowledge, yes, but it need not stain if you conduct yourselves henceforth with truth. The dead woman's secrets lose their power when they are brought into the open. That is why criminals fail. They mistake shadows for strength, but truth shines a stronger light." Miss Grey, still pale, whispered, "She threatened me too, monsieur. Why would she have written of me?" Poirot's expression softened. "Because you observe, mademoiselle, and the one who observes always frightens those who deceive. Take courage. You did not seek power, only order. That is the difference." The pianist crept forward, shame burning in his cheeks. "I thought you suspected me. My panic, my foolishness." Poirot placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "Courage, mon enfant. Fear is no crime, but learn from this. Panic blinds, calm reveals. Tonight you have seen how appearances mislead, and how the smallest clue unmasks the cleverest lie. Madame Lemoine, sombre and inscrutable, lowered her veil. She dealt in poison of the soul, monsieur. Better she had never crossed the Channel. Poirot gave a small bow. Perhaps, but evil travels as easily as a whisper. Our task is always to listen carefully, to separate the false note from the true. That is the gift of the little grey cells. The constables departed with their prisoner, and slowly the guests dispersed, subdued but grateful. At last the drawing-room was quiet, the fire sinking low. Poirot stood alone with Lady Hesketh Dubois, who said softly, "You make it sound so simple, monsieur, yet you saw what none of us could." He smiled faintly, adjusting his cuffs. "It is always simple, madame. Once one sees. But to see, one must look not with the eyes, but with the order of the mind. There, everything falls into place, the pearls scattered, the ink upon the glove, the two tidy letters. They spoke, and I listened." He took his hat and cane, prepared to depart. At the door he paused, his dark eyes glancing back at the velvet curtains now hanging undisturbed. "Behind curtains, madame, one hides to overhear, to deceive, to surprise. But sooner or later the curtain is drawn, and the truth stands revealed. Always remember that." With a polite bow, Hercule Poirot stepped into the night, the storm easing into silence, leaving behind a house that would long remember the evening when a shadow hid behind the curtain, and the little grey cells pulled it into the light.